She froze the account while he was still on oxygen. So this wasn't panic, right? How long has she already been preparing this?
My wife told the hospital security guard to call her if I showed up. Not call her, so she could come get me. Not call her, so she could explain. Call her, so she could have me removed. I found that out later. At the time, all I knew was that my key didn't work. 11 days in the ICU. 11 days of monitors beeping, nurses checking my vitals every few hours, a chaplain stopping by on day 3 because someone on staff thought I looked like I needed one. 11 days of surviving something that had a very real chance of killing me, and I did it. I made it through. I signed my discharge papers, I thanked every nurse I could find, and I walked out of that hospital in early December thinking the worst was behind me. I drove home. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. And again. I stood there on my own porch, the porch I had repainted 2 summers ago, the porch where I used to drink coffee every morning, and I could not get inside my own house. There was a note taped to the door. My wife's handwriting. Clean, controlled letters, the same handwriting I had watched sign our marriage certificate 22 years ago. Do not come inside. Call my attorney. No name. No explanation. Just an attorney's phone number and a period at the end of the sentence, like the conversation was already over. I was still wearing my hospital bracelet. Now, I need you to understand something before we go any further. My name is Marcus Webb. I was 54 years old. I was a civil engineer for 30 years. I coached youth baseball for 6 seasons. I remembered every birthday in my family without a calendar. I was not a perfect man, no one is, but I was a present one. I showed up. That was the thing I was most proud of in my life. That I always showed up. And standing on that porch in December, discharge papers in my hand, I had never felt so completely erased. Before we continue with this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Here's what I didn't know yet. Diana had been planning this for over a year. The locks weren't a reaction. They were a conclusion. And by the time I understood what she had actually done, the accounts, the attorneys, the careful, quiet dismantling of everything we had built, I would be sleeping in my car on Christmas Eve. But that's not where the story ends. Because years later, at my funeral, Diana walked through the door, and she saw who was standing at the front of the room. Stay with me, because what she saw, and what it cost her to see it, is the whole point. By day 3, I had $340 in my account. Diana had called the bank the same morning I was admitted to the ICU. I don't know if she waited until I was unconscious, or if she made the call from the hospital parking lot. I've thought about that more than I should. What I know is that by the time I was stable enough to check my phone, the joint account had been restructured, 2 credit cards had been frozen, and attorney had already filed the initial divorce paperwork. She didn't wait to see if I would survive. She filed while I was on oxygen.
She froze the account before he even left intensive care. So this was already planned, wasn't it? And how far has she taken this?
Let that sit for a second. I want to be fair here, because fairness is something I've held on to through all of this. Diana wasn't a monster. She was something harder to explain than that. She was methodical. She was a woman who had decided, quietly and without drama, that our marriage was over, and then she built a legal fortress around herself before I ever had a chance to respond. The loan she had taken without telling me, the one tied to her brother's failed business venture, had cost us $78,000 over 2 years. I had been working double contracts to cover it without complaint because I thought that was what you did. You carried what needed carrying. She interpreted that as emotional abandonment. Her attorney would later argue, with a straight face, that my long work hours had systematically isolated her, that I had been emotionally unavailable, that she had suffered. The same woman who froze my accounts while I was on a ventilator suffered. By night, for I had figured out the logistics of sleeping in my car. You learn things faster than you expect when you have no other options. Park under a light, but not too close to traffic. Keep the seat slightly reclined, fully flat, makes your back seize up by morning. Don't run the heat all night. Ration it. I had 1 change of clothes, my phone charger, and a fast food bag I used as a trash can. I was 54 years old. I had built bridges for a living, and I could not get back inside my own house. I called Lionel on day 5. My son from my first marriage, 28 years old, smart, guarded in the way that kids of divorce learn to be guarded. Diana had spent years positioning herself carefully between us. Not dramatically, just subtly. A comment here, a missed invitation there. The kind of slow erosion you only see clearly in hindsight. I called him from a McDonald's parking lot at 7 a.m. and got his voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I have said? It was a nurse who found me. Her name was Renata Osei. She was the charge nurse on my ICU floor, 43 years old, precise, the kind of person who made you feel like you were in the right hands without saying a single reassuring word. She had done her job. I had been discharged. There was no medical reason for her to be looking out for me. But she saw me on day 2, sitting in the hospital parking lot at 9 a.m. in the same clothes I'd left in. She recognized me immediately. She knocked on my car window. I rolled it down. She looked at me for a moment, not with pity, which I couldn't have handled, but with something more practical than that. Assessment. Like she was taking stock of a situation. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. I told her the truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother has a spare room. She doesn't speak much English, but she makes very good soup." I almost said no. I had my hand on the window button to roll it back up. I don't know what stopped me. Pride had already cost me everything. Maybe that was it. Maybe I had finally run out of pride. I said yes. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known standing in that parking lot, was that inside Renata's mother's house was a 9-year-old boy named James. And that one day, he would carry my last name. I stayed with Renata's family for 6 weeks. I showed up as a charity case. A broken-down man in yesterday's clothes with a fast food bag full of receipts and nowhere to sleep. That's what I was. I'm not going to dress it up. But something happened inside that house that I didn't expect and couldn't explain at the time. I started to feel like a person again. Renata's mother, Adwoa, was 71 years old and approximately 5 feet tall. She spoke Twi, a little French, and about 40 words of English, 12 of which were food-related. She communicated primarily through expression and the strategic placement of plates in front of you. The first morning, she looked at me across the kitchen table, studied my face for a long moment, and then put an extra piece of bread on my plate without a word. That was it. That was the whole gesture. I had to look away because I was not prepared for how much it would hit me. James was 9, Renata's son. Quiet the way some children are quiet, not shy, just watchful. He had his mother's eyes and a seriousness about him that made you want to earn his attention rather than demand it. He showed me his Lego collection on day 3. Full presentation, organized by color and set number. I sat on that floor for 2 hours, and he walked me through every single piece like I was a visiting dignitary. It was the best 2 hours I'd had in months. Meanwhile, the divorce was getting ugly. Diana's attorney was sharp. The argument was elegant in how dishonest it was. Marcus Webb, emotionally unavailable, chronically absent, a man whose work consumed him while his wife struggled in silence. On paper, I looked like a ghost who occasionally deposited money. In reality, I had been covering a debt my wife created without my knowledge, working myself half to death to keep us afloat, and apparently doing it so quietly that it could be reframed as neglect. I had no attorney. I had $340 and a parking lot. The hospital's social work department connected me with a pro bono attorney, Karen Solis, 39, sharp and no-nonsense, the kind of lawyer who looked at Diana's filing and said, "This is aggressive the way a surgeon says this is going to be interesting." She wasn't rattled. That helped. Then Lionel called. Not to apologize. Not to check in. He called because Diana had asked him to sign an affidavit, supporting her claim that I had a drinking problem, that I had been volatile, that our home had been, in her word, unstable. Lionel said he sat with the affidavit for 3 days. He read it 4 times. And then he called me because something in him said no. He showed up at Renata's mother's house on a Thursday afternoon. First time I had seen my son in 4 years. We stood in the doorway for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Neither of us knew what to do with our hands. Then James appeared behind me, looked up at Lionel, and said, completely unprompted, "Do you want to see my Legos?" Lionel looked at me. I shrugged. He went in. I stood in that doorway watching my son sit on the floor with a 9-year-old boy who had absolutely no reason to be kind to him, and James was kind to him immediately, freely, without conditions. And something inside me that had been locked up tighter than that front door on my own house just cracked open. But Diana wasn't finished. The week before the final hearing, she filed an emergency motion. Harassment. Third-party contact. She claimed Lionel's decision to support me constituted a coordinated campaign against her. The judge issued a communication order. I could not contact Diana directly. Karen told me to stay calm, to trust the process. I tried. The night before the final hearing, I sat on Renata's back porch in the dark. I wasn't thinking about the judge or the retirement accounts or the house I couldn't enter. I was thinking about how I had gotten here. How a man spends 22 years building something and doesn't notice the foundation shifting beneath him. Renata came outside and sat beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "James asked me today why you call me Renata and not Mom." I didn't know what to say. I looked at her. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were still figuring some things out." She said it gently. No pressure. No expectation. Just the truth, offered quietly in the dark. I had no idea yet how much I still had to figure out, or how much I was about to lose before I found my way to the other side of it. The judge ruled in my favor on the retirement accounts. Diana got the house. I walked out of that courtroom with a settlement check, a son who was finally returning my calls, and the clothes on my back. Karen shook my hand on the courthouse steps and said, "You held up well." I nodded. I didn't tell her that I had gripped the edge of that defendant's table so hard during closing arguments that my knuckles had gone white. That I had sat there listening to Diana's attorney describe me, a man I didn't recognize, and had to remind myself to breathe. I drove back to Renata's mother's house. Adwoa had made soup. She put extra bread on my plate. Same gesture as the first morning. I had to look away again for the same reason. That should have been the end of the hard part. It wasn't. 3 years passed. Good years, genuinely good, which I say carefully because I earned the right to call them that. Renata and I married quietly. Courthouse. Lionel as witness. James in a clip-on tie he had selected himself from a rack at Target and presented to me the morning of, very seriously, as though he had sourced it from a tailor. We had dinner at Adwoa's afterward. She made enough food for 20 people. She called me Miba for the first time that night. My son in Chui. I had to ask Renata what it meant later because I didn't want to ask in front of everyone and lose it at the dinner table. I adopted James the following spring. The paperwork took 4 months. The day it was finalized, James, 10 years old, completely composed, shook my hand very formally in the hallway of the courthouse, then immediately ruined it by hugging me so hard I stumbled backward into a bench. James Webb. He started going by Jamie. I went back to consulting work. Smaller scale than before, but steadier. Lionel and I rebuilt slowly, dinners every few weeks, phone calls that started awkward and got easier. He told me once, unprompted, that he wished he had answered that first call from the McDonald's parking lot. I told him it didn't matter. He said it mattered to him. We left it at that. Diana, through the network of mutual acquaintances that outlives every divorce, heard that I had remarried. Heard that I had adopted a child. Lionel told me carefully he had maintained minimal contact with her out of obligation to extended family, that she had cycled through 2 relationships since the divorce, that the business venture with her brother had never recovered, that she had sold the house and moved into a rental across town. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I want to be honest about that. I felt something closer to exhaustion, the kind that comes not from anger but from finally, completely, letting something go. Then my heart reminded me it had unfinished business. Different from the first event, not a cardiac arrest but a progressive condition, the kind that builds quietly behind your ribs and announces itself only when it's already made significant progress. My cardiologist laid it out plainly. I appreciated that. I have never wanted to be managed. I told Renata the same evening at the kitchen table, with Jamie doing homework in the next room. I told her everything the doctor said. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers and said, "Okay, then we don't waste any of it." We didn't. 8 months. I declined faster than the projection suggested, which my cardiologist called unpredictable and which I called deeply inconvenient. But I was present for every one of those 8 months in a way I am not sure I had ever been present for anything. I went to Jamie's school play. I watched 3 sunrises with Renata on the back porch. I had a long dinner with Lionel where we talked about his mother, my first wife, for the first time in 20 years, honestly, and without defensiveness. It was one of the best conversations of my life. I passed on a Tuesday in November. Renata was holding my hand. Lionel was in the chair by the window. Jamie was sitting on the edge of the bed, very still, the way he had been watchful as a 9-year-old in that first week. He hadn't lost that quality. I was glad. The funeral was modest. 60 people. Warm. Renata planned every detail. Lionel spoke. Jamie, 13 now, in a suit he had picked himself, stood at the front of the room and read a poem I had written for him the day his adoption was finalized. His voice only broke once near the end. He steadied it. I would have been so proud of him. Halfway through the service, the door at the back of the chapel opened. Diana walked in. Alone. She looked older in the way that grief and regret age a person differently than time does. She scanned the room slowly, and then she stopped. At the front, Lionel, Renata, and a 13-year-old boy in a suit, holding a program with Marcus Webb printed on the cover, carrying the same last name she had spent years attached to and walked away from without understanding what it meant. She saw what I had built. She finally understood what she had thrown away. And the question she would have to carry home with her, the one no courtroom and no attorney and no carefully changed lock could ever resolve, was whether she had known, somewhere beneath all that strategy, exactly what she was destroying. I should tell you something. You've been listening to Marcus tell the story. But Marcus can't tell it anymore. I'm Renata. And this is the part he asked me to finish. He didn't write it down. Marcus wasn't a man who wrote things down. He was a man who showed up, which is a different kind of record-keeping. But in those last 8 months, on the back porch, in the early mornings before Jamie woke up, he told me everything. All of it. The porch with the changed lock. The parking lot. The $340. The bread Mama put on his plate. He told it to me in pieces, the way you do when you're trying to make sure someone else holds the shape of something before you can no longer hold it yourself. So I'm holding it. Here is what actually happened. All of it clearly, because Marcus deserved clarity even when life didn't give it to him. Diana had been planning the divorce for 14 months before Marcus was hospitalized. The attorney consultations began in October of the year prior. The account restructuring, the beneficiary removals, the careful documentation of Marcus's work hours reframed as emotional absence. It was built methodically, brick by brick, while Marcus was working double contracts to cover a debt she had created. She wasn't cruel in the explosive sense. There were no dramatic fights, no thrown dishes, no final confrontation. She was something harder to defend against than cruelty. She was decided. She had looked at her life, looked at her husband, and concluded he was a ceiling rather than a foundation, and then she dismantled everything quietly enough that by the time he noticed, the structure was already gone. The cardiac event didn't cause the divorce. It just gave her a window she had already been waiting for. I want you to understand that because I think it matters. Marcus spent a long time asking himself what he had missed, what he had failed to see, what version of himself might have changed the outcome. The answer, the true answer, is that there was nothing. You cannot outlove a decision that was already made. You cannot show up hard enough for someone who has already left the building. Marcus was not abandoned because he was lacking. He was abandoned because Diana had decided her life looked better without him in it, and she was wrong, and she lived with that wrongness for the rest of her days. At the funeral, she sat in the back row. She didn't speak to anyone. She stayed for the entire service. I noticed because I notice everything. It's the nurse in me. She was there for Lionel's eulogy. She was there when he said, "My dad taught me that dignity isn't what you hold on to when things are good. It's what you refuse to let go of when someone tries to take everything." I watched her face when Lionel said that. She didn't look away. I'll give her that. She left before the reception. Quietly, the way she did everything. I don't know what she felt driving home.
I have thought about it.
I think she felt the specific grief of someone who made a calculated decision and then had to watch, from a distance, as the person they calculated against built something beautiful without them. That's not justice exactly. It's something more honest than justice. It's just consequence. The ordinary, inexorable consequence of choosing strategy over love. She never remarried. The last I heard, through the fraying thread of mutual acquaintances, she had moved to another city. I hope she found something there. I mean that without irony. Marcus would have meant it too. That was the thing about him that I don't think Diana ever fully understood. He was genuinely incapable of sustained bitterness. He could be hurt. He could be broken open. But he could not hate. He didn't have the architecture for it. Jamie is 17 now as I tell you this. He studies advanced mathematics and builds model bridges out of balsa wood in his bedroom, which I choose to believe is genetic. He has Marcus's way of going quiet when something matters to him, that particular stillness that means he is paying full attention, that he is taking something seriously. He keeps a photograph on his desk. Marcus in the backyard, laughing at something off camera, the summer before he died. Jamie has never taken it down. He has never needed to be asked to keep it up. It just stays there, the way the things that matter most tend to stay. Lionel came for dinner last Sunday. He and Jamie argued productively about football for 45 minutes and then did the dishes together without being asked. Watching them, I thought Marcus built that. From a parking lot. From a changed lock. From $340 and a note taped to a door. He built all of that. And I think about that porch sometimes. Not Diana's porch, not the one with the changed lock, but our porch. The back porch where we used to sit in the early mornings before the world got loud. Where he told me everything he wanted me to hold. I'm holding it, Marcus. Every single piece.
The frightening part is how organized this exit can be before one person even realizes they are being removed from their own life. So how many locked doors start long before the hospital?